No champion is unbeatable. Every champion has fighters whose styles could give them like serious problems, and today we're looking at that. So I'll be giving you the 3 biggest nightmare matchups for every champion in every division and explaining why these are the fights that they'd probably rather avoid. Also, if you like the video, please subscribe because this took me ages to fucking make. So we're going to start with the lightest division, which is flyweight, and the current champion is Joshua Van. So Joshua Van, he's looked pretty good since he has, obviously got the belt off of Pantoja because of that injury. People were calling him a fake champion, but he kind of proved himself against Tatsuro Taira with an amazing fight. But obviously, I'm going to go with the most, clear nightmare matchup for him, which is going to be the rematch against Pantoja. So the reason why I picked Pantoja is because he has been one of the most dominant champions of recent times. And, people don't recognize him as being as good as he actually was. He's not sort of placed on the level of Islam or Alex or, even Ilya. But, he really should be. And just because Dana sort of neglects the flyweight division a bit doesn't mean he's not at the top level of these guys. And, even though it did land in an injury, he's still got all the tools to beat Van on paper. And, obviously Van's special because he can dictate where the fight takes place. But, Pantoja can do the exact same thing. We've seen him against Kai Kara France, how he's able to get the fight to the ground and bring them into his world. And I think Van's going to really struggle with that. Pantoja's got also loads more experience than Van. And, a 5-round fight against Pantoja, I think Van's going to struggle. Now, I'm not saying Van's going to lose because I think Van is brilliant. And I think Van, he's one of the best strikers, pound for pound in the UFC at the moment. But Pantoja is so good, and he's so good at dictating that pace. I think over 5 rounds, Pantoja's got elite wrestling, elite scrambling, elite submission skills. He's got elite pressure. I think Van's going to struggle. I'm not going to deny that. Obviously I've got to back my boy Van. I've been watching him since day one, but it's going to be a struggle for him. I'm not going to deny that. The rematch will happen. Obviously, we've not seen Pantoja since that arm injury. We don't know how bad it really was, but he's back training again. So who knows? Who knows? But I think that is going to be the most hard fight in that division for Van. Because Pantoja is the most complete and versatile opponent in that division right now. So moving on to bantamweight, with the current champion being Piotr Yan. Yan looked amazing in that rematch against Merab, really dictating the fight and coming out victorious. And the future is looking bright. Once again, Piotr is the champion, which is great to see. But it is a tough division. There's a lot of fighters that could be really, really hard for him to overcome. And I think one of those main ones is going to be the rematch against Merab Dvalishvili in the trilogy. So the reason why I picked Merab to beat Yan once again in the trilogy is that I think Merab just fought too much. I think it's as simple as that. And they weren't quick finishes Merab were getting. They were 5-round, cardio challenging, full of takedowns. Merab's a human as well, even though he doesn't seem like it with the amount that he fights and his constant, relentless cardio. He's going to tire out. It's basic biology. And when you're fighting 4 times last year, you're going to get tired and you're going to lose. And that's what he did. I think he needs a break, which he has took. It's like midway through 2026. He's not fought yet. So I think he's taking that good break. And when he comes back, I think he's going to have even better cardio, great cage control, and his striking. I think his striking is also going to improve. We saw his striking against Sandhagen improve massively, and he was landing big shots. I think he knocked him down. I can't remember. And Yan is one of the best counterboxers in MMA, and he strikes against predictable pressure, but Merab's pressure isn't predictable. He switches between striking, clinching, takedown attempts, scrambles. Merab forces his opponents to fight at his pace. And when Yan fights, most fighters eventually slow down enough for Yan to take over. But Merab never slows down. And we saw in that first fight that Jan spent the entire fight reacting rather than building momentum. And that's why I'm going to favour him in this rematch. I think he did lose against him in that second fight because of the pure reason that he was fighting too much and his body couldn't take it. And when you're doing these 5-round wars where you're really putting your cardio to the test, it's going to be really challenging you to keep that pace through all the fights in that year. And I think in this next fight, Merab's pace, his pressure and his wrestling are going to make it extremely difficult for Jan to get comfortable and, fight the technical boxing match that he really wants to fight. Merab's going to drag him down, put that, pressure on him, and he's going to struggle. I'm not going to deny that. Okay, now moving on to featherweight, where the champ is Alexander Volkanovski. Volks looked very good. After that loss to Ilya, he came back, got the belt off Diego Lopez, and defended it against Diego Lopez. And if the UFC book the third fight against Diego Lopez, I will actually jump out of a window. No one wants to see that again. It's clear that Volk is just levels ahead. The real fight that they should book is going to be who I think is the worst matchup for Volk in this division, which is Movsar Evloev. Movsar is often compared to other Dagestani wrestlers, but he's quite a lot different because he's not looking for one takedown. He shoots repeatedly, forces clinches, he pushes opponents into defense, he makes them defend for entire rounds, and he always chains one attempt into another. But even when he doesn't secure the takedown immediately, he's going to burn your legs, he's going to burn your cardio. And against someone like Volkanovski, that's significant because Volk's greatest weapon is his movement. And if his footwork gets slowed, his striking becomes much easier to pressure. An argument, obviously, against this would be that Volk defended Islam's wrestling. And that is true. Volk did, counter Islam's wrestling very well. But Islam's style is different to Movsar's. Because Islam often wants body lock entries, trips, back takes, submissions, but Evloev is happy with 45 seconds of cage control or one mat return and standing clinches, which scoring points. And across 5 rounds, when he wins lots of these small exchanges, they can add up to a decision, which is often what Movsar does get, and that's often how Movsar wins. And I'm not going to ignore the fact that Volkanovski's, how old is he? I think he's 37. If they did fight, I think he'd be 37. And age definitely does matter. And Volk's reaction time will be slowing. He just won't have the speed to cope with Evloev's endless cardio that he possesses. And his pace barely ever changes. Round 1 Movsar and round 5 Movsar, they look the same. And that matters because when you're in that championship fight, you can win it late. And if Volk is defending, 18 takedown attempts and constant pressure, the striking output is going to decrease. And the volume's going to beat the power in this matchup. Because even though Evloev's not a knockout artist, against Volk, that could help. Because, Volk doesn't chase finishes, he chases rounds. And judges reward control, pressure, forward movement, takedowns, clinches. And if every round looks close, the wrestler often gets the benefit. Movsar's incredibly difficult to make mistakes against. He almost never overextends, swings wildly, leaves his hips exposed, and Volkanovski's best performances normally come when opponents make technical mistakes. So Max Holloway was pressing too aggressively, and Brian Ortega was accepting striking exchanges with him. And Rodriguez leaving openings and transitions. But Evloev is so cautious and so safe, which removes many of Volkanovski's usual opportunities to capitalise. I think Evloev is more physically powerful. At 145, Evloev rarely gets bullied around, and even elite grapplers struggle to reverse it. And if Volkanovski constantly reverses the clinch positions, which has been one of his trademarks, he'll spend more time back to the fence than he's used to. And also, I think 5 rounds favours Evloev more than 3. Because if it was a 3-round fight, it would give Volk more room to bank rounds when you're striking. But 5 rounds means Movsar can get more wrestling entries, more clinch time, more fatigue accumulated, and more opportunities for the judges to reward pressure. He doesn't need 1 dominant round, he needs 3 slightly better rounds than Volk, and that's how he wins. And I think the biggest reason is why Movsar wins is not that he's more skilled than Volk. And I do think if they fought, Volk would win, don't get me wrong. But I think that Movsar's style is designed to reduce the impact of Volkanovski's biggest weapons. Because when Volk's at his best, he's controlling ranges, he's feinting freely, he's throwing combinations, and he's dictating the tempo. And Evloev's entire game is built around denying these opportunities by forcing wrestling, forcing clinches, and repeated grappling exchanges. And I can see Evloev winning by, a close decision. But Volkanovski's obviously a very dangerous favourite, and it's very compelling. I don't know what this fight will be. I think I'm going to edge it to Volk. So now moving on to lightweight, where the title recently changed hands at the White House card, where Justin Gaethje shocked the world by beating Ilia Topuria. And I think the real nightmare matchup for Justin Gaethje is going to be Charles Oliveira. And I think that Charles Oliveira is very dangerous from every position. Because most grapplers in the UFC need to establish top control before they become dangerous. But Oliveira is dangerous from everywhere. He's a threat standing, he's a threat in the clinch, he's a threat off his back. And, this is going to force Gaethje to hesitate. And against Gaethje, that's huge, because Justin's offense relies on his commitment. And if he's constantly worried about exposing his neck or giving up like an underhook, for example, his striking is going to become less free-flowing, as it was against Ilia. And Gaethje's biggest strength is going to create Oliveira's biggest opportunities, as Justin's style is built around pressure. He walks opponents down, he throws combinations, and he sits down on his punches. But against Oliveira, that's going to create opportunities for clinches, trips, back takes. And at chaotic exchanges, Oliveira can turn them into grappling sequences fluently. And when he gets hurt, he doesn't panic. And we saw Ilia panic after he got hurt against Gaethje. As soon as he got cut, he was touching that eye. He's not used to being hurt, but Oliveira is repeatedly hurt in his other fights. He was hurt by Chandler in that first fight, against Poirier, against Gaethje himself. Yet he still found finishes in all those fights, because even when he is rocked, he stays dangerous. And if he survives that early storm, the momentum's going to shift. And in the clinch, it's going to heavily favour Charles. Most people are going to focus on the striking in this fight, but the real battle is going to happen when the distance closes. Because Oliveira's Muay Thai is amazing. He's got great knees, he's got great elbows, and he's got some of the best back-taking ability in the whole sport. Gaethje is strongest at punching range, but once contact happens, every clinch favours Charles more than Justin. And to beat Charles, I think Justin has to fight a perfect fight. We've seen Charles be more defensively sound against fighters like Chandler in that second fight, against Gamrot. The Ilia fight was AI, and against Holloway in that BMF belt. We've seen him, when he's striking, he's not rushing in and he's not getting caught as much as he was against fighters before, such as Gaethje, Poirier. And Oliveira's path is very simple. He's going to grapple with Gaethje, and it's going to be very dangerous. Also, if it does stay on the feet, Charles's striking has evolved. He's not just a grappler. He's got long teeps. He's got great counters. And he doesn't need to outbox Gaethje, let's say. He just needs to make Justin respect his striking enough so he can create those grappling opportunities. And Gaethje has historically struggled against submission threats. And if we look at the first fight, Gaethje scored knockdowns, but Oliveira recovered instantly. He dropped Gaethje, and then, boom, rear naked choke. And the speed with which Oliveira can capitalise on those mistakes is almost unmatched. And when there's chaos, Oliveira is at the top of his game. And Gaethje loves chaos. You know, that we saw that in the Ilya fight. It was mental, it was going straight, and these fighters don't want technical fights. But when these guys get into wild exchanges, Oliveira is going to be dangerous because their necks will become exposed, the scrambles will become messy, and when Gaethje is going to create those chaotic fights, that's the environment that Oliveira thrives in. I think the biggest reason Charles wins is not because he's the better striker. However, it's because he has more ways to win. Justin's clear route is a knockout, but Charles can win by submission, damage in the clinch, good grappling, and even a finish on the feet. And that versatility is going to make him one of the hardest fighters that Gaethje has to prepare for. And I do think that if they fight, Oliveira will win. I think that it's going to be a first or second round submission. Gaethje's getting old. I don't know how much fights he has left in him. And I know Oliveira is also quite old, but I don't think he's been taking as much damage as Gaethje has been taking. And now at welterweight, where the champion is Islam Makhachev, and he looks great. I'm not going to deny that he is one of the most, if not the most, dominant champions in the UFC right now. And yeah, I think he is the most dominant in the UFC right now, if I had to think. And, you know, he has got a fight booked against Ian Gary, so because of that, I'm not going to pick Ian Gary for his nightmare matchup, because I just want to see how that dictates. However, I think that Islam's going to win. But I think Ian Gary's got a chance. I think he's got more of a chance than people do think. And if I had to pick one person to be his nightmare matchup, I think I would have picked Shavkat. However, I'm not going to pick Shavkat because I don't know if Shavkat actually exists at the moment, because that guy has fucked off somewhere that no one knows where he is. So what are we meant to do? So for the nightmare matchup, I am going to pick Michael Morales. And I don't think that's because he's the better fighter, but I think he's better physically. And I'm going to talk about that now, because Morales is huge for a welterweight. If this guy was like a Dagestani wrestler, everyone would be saying that he's a weight bully. He walks around at probably, you know, very heavy. I don't know how much, but he is so huge for that weight class. And he's also tall, he's got a long reach. And when Islam's at welterweight, we don't know how he strikes. He didn't really strike that much against JDM. And he might not be the physically dominant force than he was at lightweight. And JDM is smaller than Morales. And that matters because we saw Islam's best control being on trips after like clinching, like body locks, and against a bigger man like Morales, these positions are going to become harder to establish cleanly. And even slight separation matters because Islam's game is built on connection. And Morales isn't a technical striker. I mean, he's technical, but he's a finisher who's got long range power. You see him throw in these straight, clean punches. He's disciplined in range. And he can punish his entries with counters, which against Islam creates a dangerous dynamic. So every takedown attempt becomes a moment where Islam has to pass through the sort of firing line against Morales. And unlike many grapplers, Morales doesn't need many openings because he doesn't overthrow. He stays sound enough to reset and punish again, which makes entries more expensive on Islam's side. And Morales can interrupt them. Islam doesn't shoot from nowhere. He builds his takedowns through feints or clinches, and Morales, if he can do well at interrupting that setup phase, and if he can keep the distance and force Islam to strike with him, then Islam's wrestling is going to become very less efficient, and even a slight drop in the efficiency matters hugely over the 5 rounds. And I'm going to talk about Islam is elite at finishing takedowns once he's in deep. But Morales' length helps him in creating space at the hips, denying those clean body lock accesses, and framing early. And if Islam cannot get the clean initial connection, he has to chain longer sequences, which means he's going to spend more time standing with Morales. And that's where Morales can knock him out and can do the damage. And also I'm going to talk about the cardio at welterweight, because the question is if Morales stays standing for even a while with Islam, then how is Islam's chain wrestling cardio going to look against a bigger opponent than JDM? And because Morales, he's probably a lot bigger than that weight class, the later rounds can be more striking exchanges because of the drop in cardio. I'm not saying Morales' defensive grappling needs to be perfect. You don't need perfect takedown defense to beat Islam. You just need good first layer defense, the ability to stand up quickly, and the avoidance of back control. And Morales' physical strength can really help here, because he can post and he can reset in these scrambles that Islam always forces opponents to, and he's harder to flatten than small opponents. We see Islam in that half guard just flattening the opponents down, and that's going to be hard for Morales. Islam's not fought an opponent that is as physically demanding as Michael Morales, and I think he can force the scrambles back to standing, and when you're standing with Morales, you're in danger at all times. And we saw Sean Brady was scared of even attempting a takedown because of the threat of Morales' striking. And if he avoids being held down for long stretches, Islam is going to lose his biggest weapon. And I think if Morales lands that early damage while Islam enters, say Morales lands a nice clean counter, Islam's going to become more cautious, and his takedowns are going to slow, and there's going to be more striking, and Morales can win on the feet. And it's going to shift from that Islam controls everything to who's landing clean in the transitions. We've seen lots of upsets this year, and Islam is at his best when the opponents fear the takedown so much that they don't want, they freeze up. But if Morales can check the entries with the punches, and he can make scrambles messy, then Islam would have to adjust. And then while Islam's adjusting is where the windows are going to open and Morales is going to counter. And I think the biggest reason that Morales can win is not that he's a better grappler, it's that he's the one of the few welterweights who is big and powerful enough to punish Islam's entries without panicking into bad positions. However, I'm going to be honest, Islam is still the more likely winner in kind of any version of this matchup. I think it's just timing and his control are elite, even against much larger opponents. But Morales' path still exists, because he brings something dangerous into every entry exchange, which is that power that doesn't need all this chaos to land. It can land in these entries. So now we're moving up to middleweight, where the champion is Sean Strickland. And I could go the basic answer, and I could say that rematch against Khamzat. But I'm going to spice it up. I'm not going to say that rematch against Khamzat. I'm instead going to say Usman, because I think Usman is going to beat Dricus, even though I don't want him to. And if he beats Dricus, I reckon he might get the title shot. I doubt they're going to give it to Khamzat again straight away, because he didn't even defend the belt. So I think Usman could beat Sean Strickland, and I think it's a hard matchup for Sean Strickland. And I think Usman has actually a very clear path to winning, even without needing some crazy performance. He just needs to work in comfortable positions and win the clinch and control game. Because Usman's wrestling can change Strickland's entire rhythm. Strickland's style depends on that steady, the forward boxing pressure, that long-range jab output. And if Usman removes that comfort, even if Usman doesn't shoot constantly, the threat of wrestling still changes everything. Strickland has to pause entries, his jab is going to become more cautious, and his forward pressure is going to slow. And that's going to reduce Sean's volume, which is the foundation of how he can win. And the clinch fighting also heavily favours Usman. And that's one of the most underrated parts of the matchup. Because when Usman's in the clinch, he brings lots of, dirty boxing, trips, heavy cage pressure, constant physical grinding. And Strickland prefers open space boxing, where he can read the shots, he can block and parry, and can reset. But if he gets stuck against the fence, he's forced into strength and wrestling exchanges and not clean striking. And Usman is one of the best clinch fighters ever. And people forget that Usman isn't just a wrestler. We've seen him having a good jab, a great straight right hand behind it, good kicking game, and quite nice cage cutting. And Strickland's defense works best against looping shots and predictable combinations and opponents who's going to stay at a long boxing range with him. But Usman fights more straight-lined and disciplined, which reduces Sean's usual defensive reads. So instead of Sean comfortably out-jabbing him, you're going to get these competitive exchanges and moments of Usman backing him up and clinch follow-ups off strikes. And Strickland normally wins rounds by small edges everywhere and making fights look uneventful but his. And Usman's going to win rounds by these big positional swings, these takedowns, these cage control, where he's going to force these reactions. And judges often overweigh who is backing up and who is being controlled and who is defending wrestling. So even if striking is close, Usman can clearly win rounds with 1 to 2 takedowns or 1 to 2 minutes of cage control. And that's often enough for these judges nowadays. And we see Strickland does struggle more with strong wrestlers than pure strikers. Sean tends to look best against these kickboxers who stay at range and the fighters who let him dictate the tempo. But against wrestlers or pressure grapplers, his output's going to drop and his stance is going to get more defensive. And even when he defends well, he's going to lose offensive rhythm, which is how he normally loses with rounds. And Usman doesn't even need to make many takedowns to win it. Because people think, you need to ragdoll your opponent to win, but he doesn't. If you get 1 to 2 takedowns per round, or even none, and just sustain that clinch pressure on the fence control, and just enough striking to not lose those exchanges badly, that's it. Strickland's style doesn't produce huge finishing danger, so Usman can safely win minutes. And at middleweight, Strickland is not small, but Usman is going to be very strong for that weight class. And that means clinches are going to become harder for Sean to escape. And I can see the core reason Usman beating Strickland is not that he outboxes him, let's say. It's that he rather removes Strickland's ability to stay comfortable at range and is going to instead force him into a wrestling heavy, cage heavy fight where Sean is no longer dictating the rhythm. And that's going to swing rounds. However, Strickland's still very hard to run away with on scorecards because he keeps coming forward. He rarely gets dominated. We don't really see Sean get dominated. So even in an Usman win, it's going to be competitive, ugly control rounds. Alright, now moving on to light heavyweight, where the current champion is Carlos Ulberg. And I think his nightmare matchup is going to be Alex Pereira. Now, I don't know if Pereira is going to move back down, but I'm going to take this as if he does, because I think that's what he should do. But he might fight Hokit. I don't know. I'm just going to say he moves down. But if Alex Pereira fights Ulberg, the clearest argument is going to be that Pereira has championship experience against people that are similar to Ulberg. And we've seen Ulberg in action. He's a long, technical kickboxer who's patient, he's not chaotic. And that's kind of the same category of fighters that Pereira has repeatedly beaten, such as Jan, where his pressure and his low kicks sort of neutralised him, Khalil Roundtree, and even Yuri. I know Yuri's a lot chaotic, but he knows how to deal with those chaotic things we've seen in Yuri. And Ulberg's style relies on these clean exchanges at range and the controlled tempo and his predictable reads, but Pereira thrives when he can download the rhythm, trap the timing, and explode with counters or calf kicks. And that's a bad thing for Ulberg over 5 rounds. And I think that the low kicks of Pereira are going to be the biggest weapon in that fight. Pereira's calf kicks slow opponents down early, and they damage movement-based fighters and reduce bounce and entry speed. And Ulberg needs footwork, fast pivots, and if his leg gets chewed up early, then he loses. He loses his entry speed, he loses his exit speed, and his defensive reaction time. And that's exactly how Pereira beat fighters like Yuri. And once Ulberg's mobility drops, then Pereira's straight left becomes a lot easier to land, and his left hook. And Ulberg is very sharp at range, but he can be quite predictable when he sets the rhythm. And Pereira's biggest edge is that counter timing and the ability to absorb those reads mid-fight like he did against Khalil. And so even if Ulberg is landing those clean volume early, he's only one exchange from losing that fight. And that's going to force Ulberg into hesitation, and that's going to reduce his output. And when that happens, Pereira's going to step in and land heavy counters. And that single KO threat is going to change that fight. And Ulberg's not a reckless fighter, but he still has to engage at some point. And that's where Pereira is unique. He doesn't need those accumulation over time. He needs one slip or one mistake, and then that's it, the fight ends. And that's going to force Ulberg to fight with more caution and more respect for Pereira. And that's going to reduce his biggest strength, which is the rhythm-based striking. Pereira's also got experience under those championship pressure. He's had multiple UFC title fights, multiple 5-round experience, fight against elite pressure and elite striker, and wins over sort of top tier light heavyweights. While Ulberg is improving, he's got less experience and fewer 5-round wars. And that matters because Pereira is very good at increasing the danger as the rounds progress. And Ulberg's best path still requires perfect distant control. For Ulberg to win, he needs clean range management for 25 minutes. And that's a very narrow path, because even if he's slightly better at range, Pereira can still damage moments that outweigh volume. And I think the biggest reason that Pereira is going to beat Ulberg is not that he's faster or he's more technical, it's that he's better at breaking those rhythmic fighters down over time. And especially those who rely on clean distance striking and movement. Like Ulberg. Ulberg needs the rhythm to win, and Pereira's entire game is designed to destroy rhythm. Alright, and now for heavyweight, where the champion is Tom Aspinall. And if I'm going to be honest, I don't think any fighter in this division is a nightmare matchup for Tom Aspinall. I think the hardest for him will be Cyril Gane, but I think that Alex Pereira fight against Gane will actually have helped him, because he's going to realise that his best path to victory is for wrestling. So I don't think I can pick one now.